Mr. Cloud from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. The federal government isn't hesitant to insert itself into the daily lives of Americans, whether it's banning gas stoves, restricting their ability to choose their own doctor, pressuring social media companies to censor their constitutionally protected speech. All have been backed by the full force of law. OSHA can slap a small business with thousands of dollars in fines for a misplaced extension cord or for failing to have their first aid kit approved by a physician. We've seen intelligence agencies ban physicians and medical experts from social media companies. The Department of Labor can impose civil and criminal penalties on mine operators for such transgressions as failing to ensure that miners ride hoist buckets in an orderly manner. But somehow the government's zeal to protect us from the smallest threats to our health and safety standards seems to stop at the doors of these agencies responsible for preventing the hazardous biological research from ongoing, and it's terribly wrong and potentially resulting in global catastrophe. Agencies like the NIH don't have a problem imposing burdensome regulations on everyday Americans, but they fail to monitor the high containment laboratories that could potentially produce another pandemic. It's a federal crime to ride a bicycle, believe it or not, without a horn on NIH grounds, but funneling NIH money to shady foreign labs lacks even the requirements of basic effective reporting. So it's clearly not a lack of conviction from their own authority or the righteousness in their safety standards that the federal government has refrained from imposing enforceable standards on dangerous biological research. We've seen far too often in the past few years the current system is designed to allow unelected bureaucrats and self-proclaimed experts shield their conduct from accountability and the taxpayers who fund them. The world has already suffered large-scale consequences of one biosecurity failure fueled by government corruption. We should be careful to ensure there isn't a second one. And one of the things that, we work on funding. Our main job here in Congress is funding. And so the grant process is tremendously opaque. And you couple that with the investigations that happen. And for example, OSHA can show up at a workplace any point, any time, and go through. But our inspections generally will be scheduled way far in advance. The labs cancel them, and so there's not the kind of oversight that we would expect to see from that kind of thing. We can continue as Congress to ask the executive branch to continue to put a heavy regulatory burden on it. The other thing that we can do, since our job is the purse strings, is to be careful in how we're spending the money. And so I would ask you what role we should play in the funding aspect of it, what restrictions, what ideas you would have for us placing restrictions on the government funding going out to make sure that it's not being misused. And one other thought that's been presented, because this happens quite often up here, is that the taxpayers will fund the government that creates a problem, and then the solution is more money toward that problem. I have real concerns when it comes to these international labs getting taxpayer-funded money when it comes to that. But if you could help us out with what kind of restrictions we could be looking at, and also how do we provide transparency to the grant writing process?
Well, I think everything that I included in my written testimony about first, just the need to re-examine top to bottom, our biosafety, biosecurity framework and look for efficiencies and close gaps is absolutely essential, and to improving our biosafety and biosecurity. And I would point you again to a comment I made earlier about one of the NSABB recommendations when it came to funding work internationally, and any international funded research or should comply with the same standards, laws, guidelines that we have in the United States, and that can be done. We have to be careful. We talk about restricting funding for biomedical research. We are in a global competition for the bioeconomy. Now's not the time to restrict funding for biomedical research when we are in a global competition, and that we need advancements in our healthcare system, and our investments in our healthcare system are underpinned by advancing technology. So we have to be very careful there.
To that point, that's kind of one of my major concerns that you're touching on, is we have U.S. taxpayer dollars funding the research in other countries who are competing against us for preeminence in this, and why we would put that on the American taxpayer is kind of beyond me. It seems like that should be extremely limited, what we're doing with international. I mean, again, we don't have a smoking gun when it comes to the labs, but it's not a stretch to say that U.S. taxpayer dollars helped fund the pandemic. You know, with what we do know that evidence was destroyed. We don't have the smoking gun, but we know that, you know, they potentially destroyed the smoking gun. So why would we put the burden on taxpayer dollars? You know, I'm not saying cancel all funding. I'm saying we should put restrictions on the funding that's going out. What should those restrictions be? And then when it comes to international, I mean, it seems to me be very limited. You know, certainly we shouldn't be investing in labs that are competing against us.
Well, I think the vast majority of our biomedical research dollars go domestically, but international collaboration is also important, and that is also how we're going to be able to enhance norms and enhance behaviors internationally. But how we fund that research is important. I agree with you there, and that we have to. Those are the how. And the what research we fund internationally will be an important thing to consider. And I think when we do international research, especially with hazardous pathogens, we have to make sure that the oversight complies with the same U.S. standards we have here, and probably needs on-site inspections and evaluation of that to just improve that oversight. I'll end with that.